first became aware of Curzio Malaparte probably sometime between 2005 and 2008. My first trip to the Amalfi Coast was a business one, and I stayed at the Hilton Palace Hotel in Sorrento at a bookselling conference, and part of that was a day at leisure, and there were a number of trips going on. And I was elected to go to Pompeii naturally, because of course it is the most famous classical site in the area. A trip to Capri was available. I hadn't done my reading then, so I didn't realise how much I was missing out, but Pompeii was fantastic and I wouldn't have changed it for the world. After returning home, I started to read up extensively on the Amalfi Coast, Capri, the Bay of Naples, that entire area of Campania around the coast, which I love so much. And one of the names I discovered was a writer I'd not come across before, which was unusual because I've been in the trade a very long time, but he is quite obscure in Britain, relatively infamous in Italy. He's becoming better known now though, because we've seen some wonderful reissues of his work from the New York Review of Books Classics, fabulous imprint. And I'm just going to show you them in the order they've reappeared. This is Caput, which is his journalistic account of experiences with figures in the Wehrmacht and the Nazi Party in World War II. Then there was a reissue of probably his most celebrated single book, L'Appel, The Skin, which was a bestseller in Italy and in Naples after the war. It caused a huge furore, and he had to retreat to Capri, to his villa, and people would throw stones at him in the street and what have you, because it caused a real furore. And it's a very interesting book to read if you've ever read Norman Douglas's Naples 44, which is published by Eland, which is the classic account of the Allies in Naples as they started to take Italy. More recently, we've seen some obscure works coming out from NYRB, and as always they do these beautiful books with these fantastic liveries, and amongst them is The Kremlin Ball. And more recently, the broader and more wide-ranging account of some of his personal life. So in 1947, after the furore in Italy caused by The Skin, he returned to Paris and then wrote this book, Diary of a Foreigner in Paris, and it covers his encounters with various literary and cultural figures and all sorts of other things. So as you can see, there are some books out there you can read. My favourite book by Malaparte is a beautiful collection of short stories published by Troubadour Press, a small press. You won't find it in many places. I do believe it's still in print, and that's the absolutely magnificent, lyrical and angular story collection, Woman Like Me, which I think is absolutely sublime. So what is it about Malaparte, and why am I so fascinated by him? Well, all great writers, of course, are liars. Lying, finding a story amongst truth and weaving it into fiction, expanding upon it, is part of storytelling. It's inevitable. We do it whether we want to or not. It just happens. We embroider. Malaparte embroidered more than most, and he made it part of his art, and you can never tell in his writing what he's actually telling you in terms of objective fact or subjective reality or just plain playfulness. So the life and lives of an icon is how I would subtitle this video. And there's this book published again by Troubadour, very academic work by William Hope, which is nonetheless fantastic, and it's called Curzio Malaparte, The Narrative Contract Strained. And I would say that sentence sums up Malaparte's fascination, his appeal, his uniqueness, what makes him infuriating and what makes him seductive. The narrative contract strained, because when you read these books you never know if they're fiction or non-fiction, and perhaps part of his scheme was to make us question subjectivity and truth, whether we are reliable narrators, whether we can ever be objective. And also, he liked to shake things up a bit, there's no doubt about that. He had a very interesting political past which we look at. So Curzio Malaparte, somebody you must know about if you go to Capri. And that's how I discovered his work, researching the Amalfi Coast. So just to talk about him a little bit, I'm going to read you a small section from Woman Like Me, which as I say is wonderful. And it's from the introduction by Robin monotoni grazie dei. I can't pronounce my Italian properly, I'm working on it. But just to say, this is what Robin says. Between biography and fiction, between magical realism and surrealism, Woman Like Me can be considered Malaparte's highest stylistic achievement in the short story format. With what I've read of Malaparte, I think it's the finest work, as I say. The haunting yet nostalgic subject matter, married with a captivating prose, result in a highly original and personal work by the author of Caput and the Skin. Robin then goes on to give us some biographical detail, which again I'm going to give you verbatim, because I do urge you to read this, because it's really beautifully translated and really well-written introduction. Kurt Erich Suckert was born in Prato, Tuscany in 1898 to a German father and Italian mother. So Malaparte wasn't Malaparte to begin with, he was Suckert, and mixed parentage. So because his name wasn't very Italian sounding, they elected to have it changed, and he changed it to Curzio Malaparte. Now Malaparte is a very interesting word, because if you think of Napoleon Bonaparte means the good half. Mal, as in the Fleur de Mal by Baudelaire, means bad or evil, the evil heart. So Malaparte means the bad half. So what a willful and wicked sense of humour that shows, and a certain rueful waywardness in that a writer would choose to call themselves the bad half, the bad part. And I think that says everything about Malaparte. He sought to upset, but in a way that would invigorate literature and make us think. Malaparte fought in the First World War for the Italians against the Germans, and he was decorated for bravery, and he was by that point starting to write, and he had some success as a journalist, and he worked for a movement called Strapese, I'm probably not pronouncing this correctly, Extra Country, and that movement did a lot of their work in a literary magazine called The Savage, and it privileged the ideal of country life over city, all sorts of other things. And he had experienced a lot of rural life in Tuscany when he was very young. And of course, as Mussolini said, Italy is a proletarian nation. And Malaparte was drawn towards fascism, as a lot of Italians were then. Gradually, he moved towards the left, very gradually indeed. And a parallel I can draw, I guess, is with Oswald Mosley, who of course was a notorious fascist, but he moved from one party to another. He crossed the floor famously in Parliament. And Malaparte is a bit like that, but of course, being a journalist and writer, he wasn't so involved directly with politics. So he worked on stories in the 20s which he described as magical realist, and there was always a vein of strangeness to them, and became very, very enamoured of that, and eventually produced a surrealist edition of a magazine. And late in the 1930s, by which time he had fallen out of favour with the fascists and with Mussolini, because he'd written a book called Coup d'etat, which is about how to practice and enact and have a successful coup, which Mussolini didn't like at all, because of course the fascists got the power virtually through that means. That sort of put him as a persona non grata, and for a while he was exiled to Lipari, which is an island off Italy. And of course the interesting thing about the Italian fascists, they were nowhere near as punitive as the Nazis were. Not to say they were great people, they weren't, but they were very big on exiling people. They did this with Carlo Levi, which you can read about in his classic account, Christ Stopped at Eboli, which is an absolutely beautiful, magnificent book, now enjoying a resurgence of popularity because it appeared on the BBC show Read Around the World, or Write Around the World. And I think Malaparte didn't get mentioned in that programme because they didn't really cover Capri. They covered southern Italy, they covered Positano briefly. But Capri has such a embarrassment and embarrassment of riches in the literary sense. You could do a whole series on it, which is why I'm doing this. So Malaparte spent some time in Lipari. He was eventually allowed to return to the mainland, and he went to Capri and he started to build his house, which is depicted on the cover of Woman Like Me. And the house, which we would refer to as a villa, because it's a house surrounded partially by a garden, mostly by the sea, on a point, a very dramatic location, as you'll see later in this video. He hated the word villa. He thought it was bourgeois, so he used casa, house. And the house was called, not Villa Malaparte, as you will often see in tourist guides and maps, and if you go to Capri, but it wasn't Casa Malaparte either. It was called Casa Come Me, House Like Me. And this book is called Woman Like Me. Now, the house, he started to build it with the help of a famous architect, but he soon became disgruntled and took over himself. And it's a wonderful, wonderful work of art, as you'll see yourself. But at the same time, he was writing these magnificent stories, which I find far preferable to these very astringent, bitter books, which are still excellent and you should read them. But this is the place to start with him for the regular reader. And for anybody interested in modernism, surrealism, you really can't go wrong. And the stories in this have titles like Woman Like Me, Dog Like Me, City Like Me, Day Like Me, Earth Like Me, and Saint Like Me. And there are other stories in it, they are interspersed, and I found in reading them that because of his outsider nature and his willingness to not conform to anything in terms of seeking out his art, and the way he deliberately aimed to be difficult, confrontational, but at the same time come up with some very, very stylish and magnificent prose, I was really drawn to Malaparte. And I'm just going to read you a brief section from Woman Like Me, and I found this really moving, and I think it's a magnificent piece of writing. And this is the first paragraph. Woman like me, donna come me. I would like her tall and brunette, with full and slender hips, and a small statue's head. A lizard's head, slightly triangular, the hair curly and short, soft like the feathers of certain birds, so that it would contrast vividly with a pale and fearful face. I would like the forehead, where night and day would softly follow one another, to be wide and fair, and for it to be my true horizon. I would like the morning to announce itself on her fair forehead before the sky dyes itself in pink, and as the day gradually wanes, for the shadow of evening to become denser between her eyelashes before it does so on the leaves, on the stones, and on the clouds. The story goes on in that vein, and it's incredibly beautiful, and it is full of the light of Capri, the harshness of Malaparte's approach sometimes, the contrast, all the mixed emotions that come from obsession and love. And it's just a magnificent piece, and I can't say enough good about it. So the Like Me stories really do draw you in, and for me, Malaparte is a writer like me. I relate to him very intensely. I love his outsider spirit, and he is somebody who, if you're drawn to people like Camus, Sartre, Hesse, Hamsun, Dostoevsky, de Beauvoir, all the great modernists, do seek him out. I personally think he's somewhere between Dino Buzatti, another great Italian writer, and to a degree maybe Calvino, but I see him more being like Borges, Georges Borges, who I think is, the master of that sort of thing. So that's Woman Like Me, so do seek it out. One story in Woman Like Me, entitled The Enchanted City, really struck a chord with me because it reminded me, as soon as I read it, of a experience I had the second time I visited Pompeii, which was in 2007, and with my partner. And we'd been in Pompeii most of the day, and to see all of it you need about 3 days because there's so much, it's so amazing and so large. And we exited by a rear gate past the House of Mysteries, and we came upon a quiet country road poppies either side, Nepenthe, Helen of Troy's opium poppies, and they were blowing in the breeze, and there was a real quietude, and there was something very eerie about the place, the weight of history, Vesuvius looming over us, and it was as if we expected to see something or somebody, maybe something from another world, but it was very, very eerie and uncanny feeling, like being watched and that something was going to materialise before us. And it unsettled us, but it was interesting. We walked down the road, and within a few hundred yards we were outside the station for the Circumvesuviana Railway to go back to our hotel in Sorrento. We had an amazing day. And when I read The Enchanted City, there were aspects of the story which really made me remember that moment because of the haunted quality of so many of the passages in this book. So since then, this has been my favourite Malaparte, and I find it ineffable, curious, strange, utterly compelling, and it's a book which everybody should read if you're interested in unusual and beautiful writing. So that was another story which is really important. House like me. So that's a look at Casa Con Me. Malaparte drifted more and more leftwards as time went on, and he had many famous guests to the house and continued to write. Eventually he visited communist China. He became very enamoured of Mao and what the Chinese Communist Party was doing after the war. So much so that on his deathbed in 1957, of cancer, sadly he was quite young still, he converted, as it were, to communism, and he was admitted as a party member. He even bequeathed the house to the Chinese Communist Party. It was later reclaimed by the family after intervention from the Italian government, I believe. And even though you can't go inside the house, you can't visit it, it's on private land, there are sometimes art exhibitions there, and I'm hoping one day to be able to get inside and have a look. But if you want to see the interior of the house, you can see it in The Skin and in La Mépris as well, and it's truly astonishing work of art. So do visit when you go to Capri, do read up on Malaparte beforehand, and get yourself a copy of Woman Like Me if you can. I really recommend it. I also recommend reading The Skin because it's magnificent, and read it alongside Naples 44 because that'll give you a real context, because they're about the same thing but a very, very different way of approaching it. So this is Outlaw Bookseller, about to sign off. Thank you very much for watching. There'll be more Capri, Naples, Amalfi Coast literary videos to come, all sorts of other videos as well. Do subscribe if you enjoy this, and thanks for watching.